There are a tremendous amount of signs and symbols in art history, and this is an example. This is St. John the Evangelist, the Apostle. He was considered the most beloved of Christ. He sits at the right hand of him in the Last Supper, so he's kind of a big deal. But reading art is something that can be difficult, and you need a background. If you don't have a Christian background, it can be very difficult to read these Christian images. And a large part of art history is certainly images that were sanctioned and commissioned by the Roman Catholic Church. So there's hundreds of years of very iconic images that are often religious. But in order to read them, we need to have an understanding of the background. So this is St. John the Evangelist, 1621, from the studio of Guido Reni. So, and I'm going to go into a little bit more of the background of each saint. So just an overview right now. So again, the Roman Catholic Church has been powerful for centuries. When I was studying art history in college, I was a little bit envious of some of the other students that had a very strong Roman Catholic background, since it was much easier for them to read the images straight off. They just knew it. So even if you are not religious or you practice Judaism, Buddhism, Islam, or other religious choice, this lecture will still be helpful to you in a museum setting when you are trying to read the images of the past. In the same way, before I go to an Eastern art museum, that's when I get my book of Buddhism out and kind of review some of the iconography in art for Buddhism. So in any case, this will be from a Western perspective, but it will increase your art literacy. She is showing humility. She is kind of put herself below on this kind of kneeling bench. And she's in a rather humble environment, not a poor environment, but not an extremely rich environment either. You have the patron peeking in. This is a three-part triptych. It's called an Annunciation triptych. It's also called the Marode altarpiece. And you have the patron peeking in almost as if there is a door that he can enter. Now, you don't really see a door behind the angel, but again, you have the sense of him peering in. And then right behind him, you have his wife. They believe that was added later. Now, in the other panel, going about his business is Joseph the carpenter. And Joseph is, of course, going to marry the Virgin, and the Virgin is going to have the Christ child, and he's going to basically be told this and has to accept this. And so it is interesting. And he's an older man as well. All around him are tools, and all around him are carpenter tools, and there are also tools that are mentioned in the book of Isaiah. So there are symbols all over. In the background, you see a prayer shawl. You also see an open window, as if that back window, as if the Holy Spirit can come in. You also see this pot, this golden pot hanging in the background, but it's empty, like a uterus that's empty, but will soon be filled. So there are all these interesting details. You have a lily. That's, of course, a symbol of the Virgin as well. So here's some details so you can see it up close and see what I'm talking about. And so 1426, and this is by Robert Campin, also sometimes called the Master of Flamel. Iconography, signs and symbols in art. So here you have the lilies close up. You also see the Holy Book on the table. You also see this candle. Basically there's one light, and then you have a prayer shawl in the corner. The mousetrap is interesting. The mousetrap was a symbol of capturing Satan in the medieval times in 1400s, right in there. So this is Northern Renaissance, late medieval. So here again are some close-ups so you can see the details. There is a guard at the gate, and he's standing also next to a rose bush. The rose bush is also a symbol of the Virgin. Here you can see a little detail of the Christ figure, and he's coming in on 7 rays, 7 fruits of the Spirit. The world was made in 7 days. There was this, whether or not that's actual or narrative or allegorical is up for argument, certainly. In the background, there is a Flemish town, and this was to make it more accessible to the viewer. It's not as large as you'd expect it to be. At least I pictured it much larger. Here you can see its dimensions are around 25 by 46, just under 46 and a half. So in any case, the mouse traps on the bench and in the shop window are also thought to allude to the writings of Saint Augustine, identifying the cross as the devil's mousetrap. Here you can see a connection to the details on the carpenter's bench and match it to Isaiah. Does the axe raise itself above the person who swings it, or the saw boast against the one who uses it, as if a rod were up to wield the person who lifts it up, or a club brandish the one who is not wood? Therefore the Lord Almighty, will send a wasting disease upon his sturdy warriors, upon his pomp of fire that will be kindled like a blazing flame. The light of Israel will become a fire, their Holy One a flame. In a single day it will burn and consume his thorns and his briars. And so this is an Old Testament text that certainly seems to preface the New Testament, the Christ figure himself as well. So the rose symbolizes the Virgin Mary. There's a rose bush in the back, kind of behind the patron. White roses in paradise said to have blushed red when she kissed them. In early Middle Ages, roses were frowned upon. They were associated with the excesses of pagan Rome, but ultimately they get embraced and they get used as a symbol for the Virgin. But I do love the fact that the Flemish town is in the background to make it more accessible and comprehensible to the viewer of the time period. And mind you, he wouldn't have had access to a lot of information on what buildings look like in first century or before first century. So Robert Campion, Virgin and Child before a fire screen. This is at the National Gallery. So here again, you see a very humble Virgin. She actually has this straw halo. It's not gold, it's not lavish. You still have the Flemish town in the background that even includes a church as well. And you still have the book with its that is kind of held with pure cloth as well. And the infant looks a little like a stringy old man. One of the differences between the Renaissance and late medieval and early Renaissance is sometimes the infants don't look like infants. And partly that was because they were careful not to make the representation so realistic that the viewer would have any confusion about it. They didn't want the viewer to worship the picture, for instance. Later, again, with the use of oil paint, certainly, it becomes more realistic. This is oil on panel and tempera, so not as realistic as oil paint. So this may be a follower of Robert Campion. This is, again, up for debate presently. St. Luke drawing the Virgin, Boston Museum of Fine Arts, by Roger van der Weyden. This is tempera on oak panel. And so again, this is incredible that this is not oil. Flemish town is outside of the window, influenced by Jan van Eyck, looking out over the city in the background, looks back to the Madonna of Chancellor Roland, which is around 1434. This is believed to be a self-portrait of the artist, the figure of Luke, and And Luke is actually shown as being pretty important because his head is actually a little bit higher than the Virgin. So that's kind of interesting. You know, this is the Queen of Heaven. Painting not in great condition, and certainly it emphasizes that artistic creativity is of value as he is drawing an image of the Virgin. So, apprenticed with Robert Campen, St. Luke drawing the Virgin, so by Roger van der Weyden. And so here you can see the Madonna of Chancellor Roland. Now, even Chancellor Roland is almost eye to eye with the Virgin, and there is that angel with rainbow wings crowning the Virgin, who again here is in red, and in the other one she's in blue. Remember, red, white, and blue are typical garb for the Virgin. In the background, we have a self-portrait of Jan and Herbert van Eyck. They're those two little figures looking out on the river there. There's all kinds of classical details in this, and so it's certainly showing the skills of the artist, but it's also reflecting back to the classical past. You know, this was the Northern Renaissance as well. So this is by Jan van Eyck, and Herbert van Eyck is was also an artist as well. Chancellor Roland, kind of a big deal. He's Chancellor to Philip the Good, Duke of Burgundy for many years. Flemish art, Flanders had a booming economy. Technically, the Duke was a vassal of France, but was pretty independent and had pretty much power of his own. Rich brocade and details, the fabrication, the textiles are really quite wonderful. The figure of the baby is looking a little more natural here, but and he's of course has his hand up in a blessing as well. He's blessing Chancellor Roland, which is significant too. And he still doesn't have the incredible naturalism that you're going to get in the Renaissance, but I think we're moving a little bit closer. But he still has that kind of old man, miniature old man look to him. And he's also sometimes painted that way because this is a child that symbolizes that he has the world on his shoulders. So he can't look like just any infant. So Angel of Heaven, because again with the really, really elaborate crown. And again, the town is in the background that makes it contemporary. The perspective is beautiful as well, the way it really creates a sense of space in there. Giovanni Battista, also called Boccaccio, and this is at the Norton Simon. It's one of my favorite paintings at the Norton Simon. It's very sensitive. It shows the wonder of this infant child as St. Joseph holds the infant. It's done in this caramel brown tones that are in the style of the Caravaggisti. Beautiful sense of light-dark contrast, chiaroscuro. The details are really just stunning. And look at the hands. The naturalism of the hands is really quite remarkable as well. So this is from the Norton Simon. A sweet, tender representation of Christ can be found in Boccaccio's St. Joseph and the Infant Christ. The artist represents the strong familial bond between Jesus and his earthly father, Joseph, which was unusual since scenes of parental affection show the Madonna and child generally. So showing the male figure here, the father figure, is quite lovely. So Boccaccio brilliantly portrays the recognizably human gesture of a baby reaching up to touch the face of his parent. You know, that's how an infant learns, is those early interactions with the parent. The act of touching is a central component. The painting depicts a human moment between father and child and also reminds the viewer of the baby's divine nature. This is a late Caravaggio work. Michelangelo Merisi da Caravaggio, which is basically Michelangelo of Caravaggio, which is where he's from. And this is a supper at Emmaus. And you can see the connection to Caravaggio with the dark tonal background, the chiaroscuro, not quite as pronounced in the work of Joseph and the Baby. And this supper at Emmaus is this moment when basically you have two figures on the way to Emmaus, and they see this stranger, and they decide to invite him to dine with them. Now we think that sounds weird, but there was a whole thing about treating strangers and guests a certain way, so it wasn't as unusual as you might think. And so this is that moment where they had been talking about Christ crucifixion and that he was gone, and this is the moment when he is revealed to them. Literally, the scales drop from their eyes. And so it's this moment where they're completely startled. Now the servers don't see what's going on. They're oblivious to it. They both have their hats on. That's one of the keys that they're not startled. Their hat hasn't come off. Their head covering hasn't come off in the woman's case. And again, they're kind of standing there like, okay, what do you want to eat? What can we get you? What can we get you to drink? Meanwhile, they're startled and their gesture is kind of going back. And it has this beautiful, spotty kind of spiritual light for which Caravaggio was known. So this is Supper at Emmaus. So what makes a Caravaggio a Caravaggio? What is a Caravaggisti? Dark tonal background, usually browns, beautiful realism, sometimes too much so. The Roman Catholic Church wasn't always delighted with dirty feet. Painting looks candlelit. Sometimes there's an internal light source, and sometimes the faces simply glow. Sometimes there's a spotty light, which makes it a spiritual light. And there are careful contours, layers, and this is oil paint. Beheadings are fairly common in Caravaggesque works. A student in Val wrote on one of my classes, she sure talks a lot about beheadings. It's not because I like beheadings, it's because it's Caravaggio, okay? Many, many followers. So he liked real details, like again, natural looking feet. But again, church was not always delighted with him. One of the more unique self-portraits is the self-portrait of Caravaggio as Medusa. And so it's pretty wild. And then this is deposition of Christ, or entombment of Christ. And so here, of course, you have this really, really Baroque style painting as Christ is being taken down from the cross. It's a strong diagonal. There's a lot of motion. You have the Magdalene whose arms are thrown up, and you have Nicodemus looking out at us. And there is just this beautiful, beautiful warm tones in it. And so these are some of the things that make a Caravaggio a Caravaggio. His work is considered Baroque. Baroque period, you often see swirling dynamic fabrications. And certainly you see the beginnings of that with Caravaggio and also right there with the Counter Reformation as well. Caravaggio's Madonna of Loreto. This is in a church that is kind of right behind the Vatican. It's not to be missed. If you don't know to look for it, you'll never find it. It has no crowds. There was no one in it when we viewed it. So Madonna of Loreto, she's garbed kind of differently in like a burgundy, velvety sort of a tunic and a purplish blue skirt. And so she's really striking and really different. Her features are a little bit more different, and her hair, again, she looks very Italian. And then you have this very, very thin halo in the style of Leonardo da Vinci. The baby looks really natural, and he's like a toddler as well. And so the Madonna of Loreto, there's a quiet holiness to this work, an elegance to the Madonna. Look at those long, elegant feet. The church was built atop a church that had an icon of the Virgin of Loreto. The church was said to contain Mary's original house that was transferred miraculously to Italy. Pilgrims come to worship there, the Madonna and Christ child. So here's one of the hallmarks of a Caravaggio are those dirty feet. Iconoclasm. Art historians hate iconoclasm. It means the breaking of images. There have been many iconoclastic events in art history, and there'll probably sadly be more. It's the opposite of religious use of images, breaks images that honor statues symbolizing sacred figures, Christian doctrine, biblical events, features of Christian worship. But there's also icons of different cultures that get destroyed as well. A huge number of them were destroyed in the Middle East over some of the war activities of the last several years. So statues in the Cathedral of St. Martin in Utrecht, Reformation iconoclasm in the 16th century, where those faces have all been removed. So very sad. It can make a political point, and I have to say I struggle with this too, as far as the breaking of Han Dynasty vases. These were 2,000 years old. He did own them. Ai Weiwei did own these vases, but they were still broken. So the humanity of Christ has been emphasized in these images. Crucifixes were common. Opponents claimed objects led to worship of idolatry. Canon 36 of the Synod of Elvira, one of the earliest to prohibit imagery lest that which is worshipped and venerated be depicted on the walls. And so this was a continued debate in Christianity. In fact, still is one of those things that occurs, and people do question how much art should be used in sanctuaries. Should they be dedicated to people or not dedicated to people? These are still questions. So from Exodus 20, early in the commandments, idolatry is clearly mentioned. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol in the form of anything in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God. And it's from the New International Version. This is from the monastery at St. Catherine, Mount Sinai. It's Byzantine and tempera panel, 13th century. And here you see the figure of a young Moses taking off his shoes because this is sacred ground. So it's Moses before the burning bush, and he's told to remove his shoes. He's on sacred ground. In a similar way, in the Arnolfini wedding portrait, the pattens, the wooden pattens, the shoes in the corner of the wooden panel show that the groom has removed his shoes because this is a holy sacrament. This is believed to be the Arnolfini wedding portrait. Now, some say it's a betrothal portrait. I personally think it's a wedding portrait. You have witnesses reflected in the convict's mirror in the back. You have Jan van Eyck, who signed it. Jan van Eyck was here. Again, almost like the painting's a legal document. It's laden with symbols. The hand clasp is, of course, a symbol of matrimony. In the 1400s, just a hand clasp and having witnesses to the event could formalize a marriage. A lot simpler than today. And then you have fruit in the windowsill, luxury fruits. And these would be a symbol of course, fertility. She's wearing green, which green dresses for marriage was pretty common. There are all kinds of symbols in this particular work. And I'm going to leave it at that for now because I could talk for an hour on this work. Four central apostles, St. John, St. Peter, St. Mark, and St. Paul. And this is Albrecht Dürer's Four Apostles of 16th century diptych. And then we also have Carpaccio's Savior Blesses the Four Apostles. And this is from Italian, and it's a Renaissance work. And the Christ figure is holding a symbol of the world with a cross on it. John the Evangelist is shown with an open book. And John the Evangelist is generally shown as very attractive. He's usually the most attractive of the grouping. St. Peter usually is shown with keys. He's the second figure there. You see a large key, one of those larger skeleton keys. St. Mark is shown with a scroll, and St. Paul is shown with a sword and a closed book in this particular work. There are many examples of many types of crosses, and there are so many more than this. Even the plan of a traditional church originally started as a cross plan, and you have the altar, and you have the transept or the crossing, and then you have the nave, and you have the narthex that are in this cross pattern. You also have the Templar cross, the Maltese cross, St. Andrew's cross, which is an X. So again, there's a number of crosses. So Greek cross, square plan in which the nave, chancel, and transept arms of equal length forming a Greek cross, generally surmounted by a dome. Churches of the Greek cross often have a narthex or a vestibule, and the type of plan was also later to play a part in the development of church architecture in Western Europe, such as Bramante's plan for St. Peter's Basilica. But again, the main key points is the apse, one of the holier areas of a church, transept, the crossing. Crossing is often where reliquaries are kept, sometimes in a stand or some sort of I don't know, platform or something. There's nave, there's side aisles, narthex. This is where people would enter. And then they also have these radiating chapels. These radiating chapels would sometimes be dedicated to families, wealthy families, that would basically commission art for those radiating chapels. Greek cross is sometimes called the cross of the four apostles. Quatrefoil cross is composed of four-leaf forms. Sometimes you see architecture that resembles this quatrefoil form as well. From the studio of Rubens, this is St. Peter, shown with his keys. Oil on panel. This is at the Timken Museum. Not always on display, but it often is. Attributes of Peter: fisherman. Christ said, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." A fish is often a symbol of Peter. A key, most often. Peter, rock of the church, foundation, and on this rock I will build my church, one of the first to recognize Christ. Denial of Peter at crucifixion and deep repentance. Before the cock crows thrice, he would deny Christ. So it shows his humanness. He was human as well. A rooster sometimes represents him, because again, before the cock crows thrice, you will deny me. Set up first Christian community in Rome, martyred in Rome, scourged and crucified upside down. Sometimes the cross of Peter is an upside down cross. But most of the apostles had gruesome deaths. So Peter was imprisoned by King Herod. He was guarded by soldiers, and through prayer he is guided out of prison by an angel. And his chains are literally just drop from him. One of the key works about the deliberation of the Liberation of St. Peter is from the Vatican fresco of Raphael. And it's just absolutely stunning. So this is at the Vatican. And here you can compare Rubens' Baroque style compared to his school or followers of Rubens. You can see the realism is significantly better with the Rubens of 1610 to 12 of St. Peter. Certainly the painting of St. Peter from his followers is beautiful as well, but the details, the hands, the skin, it's much more realistic when you can see the Rubens example. Claude Vignon, Repentant St. Peter, 1643. Kind of an odd expression on this one's face, though. And his hands look awkward to me. I find myself sitting there counting fingers because it looks like there's extra ones there. Not really, but it's still, I don't know, it looks awkward to me. But you have the keys there, and you have the rooster there, so it does have some of the typical symbols. Now, some of the images I'm going to show you are perhaps not always key images. They're more to underline a point of the symbols sometimes. El Greco, Spanish, St. Peter, San Diego Museum of Art. So El Greco meant the Greek, and so Apostle, probably Peter, Marco Pino, in a central panel. Peter is often shown bearded and older, and Rubens surrendering the keys to St. Peter. And again, he looks older here, and he's bowing down in reverence unto the crucified and resurrected Christ. Michelangelo Mercy de Caravaggio's Denial of St. Peter. This has this dark, dark, dark quality because it's not a time when St. Peter is in the light. He's in the darkness. And the woman is asking him, aren't you one of the ones that were with Christ, were with that man? And she is seeking truth, and she's kind of partly lit. And meanwhile, there's also a soldier there and he's denying Christ. So it's very somber, it's very dark, and it's very intentional. Zuberin, St. Peter. This is much quieter. I love the bright, bright white against the dark background as well. And so this is Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. Now, sometimes they give us the title and we know exactly who it is, but not all the detail of it. Hieronymus Bosch, Adoration of the Magi, triptych, which means 3 sections. St. Peter with donor, Adoration of the Magi, and St. Agnes with the donor. So this is at the Prado. Curious detail is a nearly naked man with a sore on his ankle, perhaps an indication he's come for healing. So that is kind of interesting. Herod's spies inside, behind the figure, a demon on the roof, Jerusalem in the distance, and the frame is original to the work, which is really kind of cool. But the demon on the roof is interesting. And this was a time of incredible superstitions. Some of these symbols and whatnot are perhaps lost to us. So, patrons on side panels. Saint Agnes is one of several virgin martyrs, a patron saint of virgins, girls, and chastity. This gives you a little bit of a detail. Mind you, it's a little blurry because I've blown it up. And you also see this kind of alien-looking Christ figure as well, the infant. It's certainly not as developed as it's going to get during the middle of the Italian Renaissance. Guido Reni, Italian, St. Matthew and the Angel, 1635 to 40. Again, there's this communication between the two. It's really quite gorgeous. There's also Rembrandt's version with St. Matthew and the Angel has her hand or his hand on Rembrandt. It's funny because this particular figure is kind of androgynous. It's hard to tell if it's a male or a female angel. I guess it doesn't really matter. So his hand is leaning in, and it's as if he's almost whispering in his ear. And so you could even call this inspiration, really. So Matthew and the angel, mat comes from the term manos, hand, and Matthew, theos, God, so it means essentially hand of God. Naming is frequently symbolic in Christian tradition. Wrote gospel in Judea and preached in Ethiopia. Tax collector before he followed Christ. Attributes are often a purse, a pen. Sometimes you'll see a little bit of money somewhere as an allusion to the tax collecting. Often angel holds inkwell or guides his hand, and also sometimes he's shown with an axe, a symbol of his martyrdom. Yet another one of those grisly deaths. Calling of St. Matthew, 1599, 1600. And this is a detail. This is a part of a painting, just so I can show you the very, very thin Leonardo da Vinci type of halo that's right above Christ. And you have Peter that is standing right next to him. And Christ is reaching out and pointing to Levi, who will become Matthew. And he's asking him to come and follow him. And so here you can see the full painting. And Matthew essentially is like, me? You're talking to me? And the other two figures at the end of the table don't really see what's going on. They've got their heads down. They're in their own worldly world, staring at the table, staring at coins. One has got glasses on. Glasses showed up around the 14th, 15th century. I most think around 1300s, right in there. Although early on we have it written that Nero wore green glass sunglasses. Now I don't think he particularly saw through them particularly well, but it's said that he indeed had them. But as far as for vision, not believed to be used until around the 1300s. So he's pointing to himself, you want me to follow you. He wants him to basically take up everything and follow him immediately. And then the other two figures, the youthful figures, are dressed similar to the way Caravaggio would have been dressed. Caravaggio was quite the little flashy dresser, feathers, beautiful fabrication, it had to be bold. And one of them is actually reaching for his sword, like, who are these people that have come in here and pointed at him and said to follow him? Some argument as to where they are. Is this a counting room? Is it a tavern? I don't know that it matters, but these are the sort of things people argue about. The light is unnatural. Technically, Christ's face should be more in the shadows, but it isn't, because of course Christ is associated with light and light imagery. And there is that kind of spotty light that you see on the faces of the people that are looking at the Christ figure. The ones that are looking down are a little bit more shadowed. And if you recognize the gesture of the hand, yes, it is from the creation of Adam, the central panel of the Sistine Chapel by Michelangelo Buonarroti. So, they had the same name, Michelangelo, so he would have seen this work. This would have been a work he would have referenced as well. So, but here, Christ basically has his hand in the same gesture as Adam, so he is the new Adam. So you can see all the details of those hands. So naturalism, chiaroscuro, light, dark contrast, brown tonal backgrounds, three-quarter view. It invites the viewer in. It brings you up close. It's not a bunch of figures on a table. It invites you in. So we have original of St. Matthew and the angel, and then we also have the second example, because the first one was rejected, and then we also have a detail from the calling of St. Matthew. These are all St. Matthew, and these shown writing and being inspired by angels, by God, by the Holy Spirit in his writing. Rembrandt, St. Bartholomew, 1657. And here we show, he is shown with a knife because that is a symbol of his martyrdom. So St. John the Baptist and St. John the Evangelist are between the donors in the Ghent altarpiece. In Grassai, gray paint made to fool the eye. It looks sculptural. So St. John the Baptist, St. John the Evangelist are, again, they're shown as the center of the closed panels of the Ghent altarpiece. The panels aren't often shown closed like this, so this might even be new to many of you. And then on the very ends, in red, you have the donors. So St. John the Evangelist, often shown with a chalice, survived an ordeal in Ephesus, unaffected by a beverage that was concocted by snake's venom. When offered this chalice, St. John blessed it, and the venom in the form of a snake was miraculously drawn out of the liquid. Legend says he was lifted up in Assumption by an angel. Patron saint of booksellers. In fine arts, he's often shown with an eagle, book, gospel, or revelations is what he's associated with. Snake or dragon are often shown emerging from a cup or chalice. So when you see this iconography, you are seeing St. John the Evangelist. And mind you, beautiful, fair of face, right hand of Christ, the beloved of Christ, the one he asked to watch his mother after he passed away and then was resurrected. St. John the Evangelist's emblems, again, are the eagle to show highest inspiration and the chalice. Emperor Domitian asked him to drink a poisoned chalice. When he lifted it up, snakes came out. If you've noticed, I sometimes tell you slightly different stories. That's because a lot of them are, some of them are biblical, some of them are legendary, some of them are apocryphal, some of them are oral traditions. So sometimes the stories vary just a bit. But the third figure really shows you a figure that, if it wasn't identified with being an evangelist, people might have difficulty with it because the figure is indeed so beautiful. Domenichino, St. John the Evangelist, Italian, that's 17th century. A larger one was in the prior page. St. John the Evangelist, again, beautiful, fair of face, from a prosperous family. This is fairly unusual. Close companion to Christ. And again, he was entrusted the care of his mother to John upon his death. He was one of the apostles to find that Christ was not in his tomb. Some churches believe John brought Christ's mother with him to Ephesus, where she died. Some believe he wrote Revelation. Pontormo's Mannerist vision of St. John the Evangelist, 1520s. Church of St. Felicita in Florence, writing implement in hand. Tondo is a round format of a work. St. John the Evangelist, some people believed he was martyred by being boiled alive in oil. Some believe he lived a long life and did not die a martyr. So there are both schools of thought out there. Hans Friis, Boiling of St. John the Evangelist, and St. John the Evangelist in a Cauldron, Book of Hours of Simon de Vary, 15th century. So perhaps known as best known as his role in controversial Da Vinci Code, which is fiction. The Vatican vehemently opposed it. One premise is that the figure of St. John the Evangelist in the Last Supper is actually the Magdalene. Scholars profoundly disagree. St. John was beautiful, and Da Vinci carefully arranged the figures in a triangular format, and there are 12 apostles. So again, here are some of the more tragic looking of these martyred deaths here. So this is the disciple that witnessed the raising of Jairus' daughter, the transfiguration. He was sent with Peter to make preparations for the Last Supper, witnessed the agony in the garden, stood alone of all the disciples with the Blessed Mother at the foot of the cross. His place at the Last Supper was next to Christ. He was the first after the resurrection to hasten with Peter to the grave of the Savior. He recognized the Blessed Redeemer after the resurrection, after the ascension of Christ. St. James the Less, Pompeo Girolamo Bottoni, classical artist, followed the ideas of Raphael. And so two of the apostles were named James. So in Latin texts, one was called Jacobus Major, one was called Jacobus Minor. So James the Greater, James the Less. Major and minor refer to seniority, not importance. So pre-modern sources in Western Christianity have assumed Apostle James was the same James, the brother of Jesus, the first leader of the church in Jerusalem, and mentioned in Acts of the Apostles. There are challenges to this assumption. He was righteous. Jewish leaders asked him to stand at the temple and warn about the message of Jesus had of being resurrected and when he would come again. When he did the opposite, they pushed him to the ground, stoned him, and beat him to death with a fuller's club. So he also is shown with the example of his martyrdom. So not one that you see a lot of, but I tried to make this as complete as possible. James the Lesser. A fuller is a person who cleanses the impurities out of wool and thickens it in a process that originally involved beating it with a club. So if you wondered what a fuller was, because I did. Mosaic, St. Mark's, mostly 11th to 13th century Byzantine examples are at St. Mark's. St. Mark, all over Venice, patron saint in Venice. So St. Mark by Donatello, early Renaissance. St. Michel Church and Museum. Symbols, the lion, the winged lion, the Lion of Judah, patron saint of Venice, occurs in many artworks. His boat was stranded there, according to legend. Angels said a great city would rise up in his honor. So he travels with Paul and Barnabas to spread the gospel, not one of the 12 apostles, but it's believed that he wrote the first book of the Bible. So often with book, pen, writing implements. And this is Guido Reni, St. Mark, Baroque painting. There's that golden tonal background, lots of warm tones, very much in the style, in many ways, of Caravaggio. Not quite as dark. Now I showed this to you earlier, but I'm showing it to you in context of the iconography of St. Luke. So patron saint of the arts, lived 1st century, may have written Gospel of Luke, experts argue, a traditional author of 2 books of the New Testament. Companion to St. Paul, physician and a Gentile, so it did not come from a Jewish family. Paul mentioned him as a co-worker and a physician. Miraculous healings and spreading the Christian faith is something of which he was known. So, and again, this is believed to be a self-portrait of the artist as well. So it's kind of elevating to place yourself as St. Luke, I think. So these are examples of St. Mark in sculpture, in niches, in paintings, in architecture. In Madrid, a mosaic lion. This is a symbol of St. Mark at the Iglesia de San Manuel de San Benito. And Iglesia means church. His gospel came as the roar of the lion. St. Mark represents the fulfillment of Jewish prophecy of the lion of the tribe of Judah. And so here, just beautiful details. The mosaic is gorgeous and so meticulously rendered, just little tiny details. But the winged lion, you see a lot in Venice. You often see him at the top of columns. The iconography is all over the city. Venice, St. Mark's Central Dome mosaic, 11th century. This is in St. Marco's Basilica, which is virtually all done with these teeny tiny golden mosaics. It is stunning inside. So when we went, I was fortunate that the place we stayed was not very far. So when my family was exhausted and going to sleep, I was zooming around St. Mark's again. But it's absolutely stunning. It's well worth it. Venice is breathtaking. So mosaic detail showing the transfer of St. Mark's body. Venetian merchants stole the supposed relics of St. Mark the Evangelist from Alexandria, Egypt, which was where his resting place was. And the Venetians are said to have hid the relics in a barrel under layers of pork to get them past Muslim guards. The escapade is actually shown in 13th century mosaic above the farthest left of the front entrance of the basilica because the Muslim guards would not touch pork. It was considered dirty. And the Christians knew this, so this is what they wrapped the relics of the saint in. Why are they stealing relics? Well, in the 9th and 10th century in particular, but also ongoing, there was a great push to have pilgrimages, and it actually drew in tourism. And so if you had relics at a church dedicated to the virgins, St. Bartholomew, St. Mark, and if you had a relic or part of the body of the saint, or in rare cases, the whole body of the saint, but usually it's a part of the body, a finger, a toe, or hair, all different types of things. And if you had these relics, it was essentially a way to communicate all the gifts of that saint to the person who is on pilgrimage to it. So these are some more examples of St. Mark. So Byzantine mosaic, St. Sophia Cathedral in the Ukraine, and St. Mark's Basilica in Venice. Just gorgeous. Tintoretto, St. Mark's body brought to Venice. Venice's prestige increased with this acquisition from Alexandria. So pilgrims wanting forgiveness went to pray at a shrine, and they might stop at stalls where they would buy relics, holy water, pieces of saints' clothing. And so, yes, this was very much part of medieval times. So by the 10th century, demand was so high for these saints and even pieces of the true cross. Later, there were more rules and sanctions controlling these practices because it got corrupt. Big surprise. Reliquary of Saint Juliana, reliquary of Saint Balbina. Sometimes you can tell it's a hand or a figure because it's in an arm reliquary, or a finger reliquary, or a hand reliquary. These are actually called speaking reliquaries. They belong to a class of objects that are referred to as body part shaped, or again, speaking reliquaries that correspond to a part of the saint. In 1376, the School of St. Juliana, the gift of the Brothers of San Domenico of the Perugian convent, dedicated to the saint, was carried in procession and received by the Abbess Gabriella. This is from the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Patron saint for sickness. She refused to marry a pagan. She was tortured and ultimately beheaded. So according to this reliquary, we would have part of the head, certainly, of the saint. Some arm reliquaries contain the remains of not just one, but several saints. Others hold relics from different parts of the saint's body or contact relics. The popularity of arm reliquaries from the 12th century onward was considered a result of their usefulness as liturgical props, which allowed clerics to animate a saint's body during liturgical celebrations and processions. They even sometimes dress sculptures of the saints. In this way, the saint could literally bless, touch, and heal the faithful with his own hand. So they became part of rituals. According to medieval lapidaries, rock crystal was a symbol of spiritual purity, and it occurs naturally. The mineral was frequently used to adorn saints' reliquaries from the early Middle Ages on. Rock crystal is not merely decorative, but is also used as a chamber. In this way, the relic is revealed for veneration rather than hidden from view. So it magnifies the relics that are inside. And this also kind of increases the presence of the saint indeed. So this is one that has rock crystal. And it's fairly enduring too, which is remarkable to me. The Transfiguration, recorded in the first three Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. John the Fourth does not contain an account of the event, but does refer to it when he says, "And the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, the glory of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth." The holy apostle Peter also recalls his, as well as James and John's, presence with the Lord on Mount Tabor. And so that's how we have the names of the apostles that are right around Christ on Mount Tabor as Christ is being transfigured or lifted up. So, for he received God the Father honor and glory when there came such a voice to him from excellent glory, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." And this voice which came from heaven we heard, and we were with him in the holy mount. And this is from Peter. So it's the Transfiguration by Raphael is just, there's so much movement. It's an icon of the Renaissance. The fabrication is amazing. You see some of the miracles of Christ, some of the healings of Christ in the foreground. And again, you also see the apostles witnessing the Transfiguration when Christ is literally lit up. So Christ appearing in clouds between Saints Peter and Paul with Saints Cosmos and Damian. So this is an Alps mosaic, Monastery of St. Catherine, Mount Sinai, Egypt. And this is a Byzantine example. So in any case, I hope this helps to make it a little bit more legible to you. It's still a tip of the iceberg. There are so many other saints that we could cover. If you are interested in more, read Ferguson's Signs and Symbols in Christian Art. You can get it for almost nothing on Amazon, just for the cost of shipping. There's several editions. I own a newer one and an older one. It doesn't matter. But it talks about each of the saints, the attributes of the saints, what's the saints known for. St. Margaret, healer of childbirth, and basically all the different, or many, not even all, but many of the saints and many of the legendary stories of the Bible. So it's a helpful book, and it's one a lot of art historians use. So thank you.